But let me begin with vaping, just to tell you again that the government, they've announced they're set to close. They call it an unacceptable loophole, which allows e-cigarettes to be given away to teenagers, while also looking into the rules around the sale of nicotine-free products to under 18s. You might have seen that the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has said he's worried about the colourful marketing and also the risk posed to his two own daughters who are aged 10 and 12. We do know that research by NHS Digital shows that 1 in 5 15-year-old girls use electronic cigarettes, 7 percentage points higher than boys of the same age. And in a moment, I'll speak to a parent whose daughter was addicted to vaping and also to a head teacher who's trying to get control of vaping in his school. But first, let's listen to Linda Bald. She's Professor of Public Health at Edinburgh University, an expert in this field. And I asked her if vapes are dangerous.
They're not safe, they're not risk-free. I think we can look at absolute and relative risk. So relative risk, the comparison is always going to be smoking. Mm-hmm. And in that case, vaping is significantly less harmful than smoking. And we know that from multiple studies, both in humans and in the lab. But that's just because smoking is so uniquely harmful. In absolute terms, of course, vapes have risks, and the risks that we're aware of are related to several components. The first thing is nicotine, which in itself is not harmful to health. We prescribe it to pregnant women who smoke, to people with cardiovascular conditions in the form of nicotine replacement therapy. But it is addictive. So it's the nicotine, which means you want to use the product and you keep using it. And you can have nicotine withdrawal, which for a young person can be very disruptive. They're craving their vape. They can't concentrate. They feel agitated and worried. Very bad news in education or work settings. In terms of other constituents, there are toxicants and carcinogens in vaping products, in the e-liquid and the vapor, at lower levels than in smoking, but not zero. And chronic exposure over a long period would result in some health harms from that.
Definitely.
Well, we actually just don't have decades of data. We do know that some of the constituents are respiratory irritants, and we have seen young people who've had lung health effects from vaping. Small numbers, but if you do that over many years, there may well be COPD or even lung cancer risk, again, at a very low level. We just don't know that. It's better to be safe than to be sorry.
And with COPD, that's chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. And forgive me because I was interrupting you there, but you were saying lungs and also...
So lungs, there may be other, the cardiovascular system, for example, might be affected by some of the constituents in vaping. We see that in some lab-based studies. Again, we just don't have the longer-term data. So the bottom line for us is, what we want is for smokers to quit. For them, vaping is a good option. But for people who've never smoked, including teenagers, why expose yourself to something that may have unknown risks in the future?
Well, I suppose putting my head into that perhaps of a teenager is maybe because it's something kind of cool to do, or is it? It has the appearance of being cool for certain people. So how do you stop that?
Young people try loads of things. I'm the mum of, they're in their early 20s now, one of them is, but, we all get that. It's absolutely right. And we were all like that in our youth. Young people are drinking, they're trying different things, of course, so they're going to try vaping. When you look at the surveys of teenagers, the number one reason for vaping is to give it a try. And then some people like the flavors, their friends are doing it. But I think the challenge for us in the UK is that these products are widely available. They're incredibly cheap and they are marketed. And of course, those things, in addition to just trying stuff, are going to enhance the appeal.
Is there a gender angle to this? I was reading that it appears to be teenage girls that are picking up an e-cigarette at a faster rate than boys.
We're seeing more experimentation in girls, but when you look at regular use, it's a bit more like smoking. It tends to be a little bit higher in young men. Mm-hmm. And in fact, in terms of vaping in teenagers generally, only about 25-26% of regular vapers are never smokers. Most of them are teens who already smoke. But when you get to the experimentation category, where there's a lot of young women, young girls, over around 2/3 of those are never smokers, the ones giving it a try. So we need to be careful.
Let's also talk about regulated and unregulated vapes. What's happening there and what's the difference?
So we introduced a regulatory framework in 2016, which actually is pretty comprehensive, but there are loopholes. And with any regulation and any age-restricted products, some irresponsible manufacturers and retailers want to get around it. So we've got an illicit trade. It's not huge, but it's there. There was a high-profile story recently about lead, nickel, and chromium being found in vapes. The problem with age-restricted products, whether it be other things that kids are not supposed to buy, you don't actually know what you're using. And if you get that product from a friend or somebody else buys it for you, it could be anything. And so therefore illicit trade is a concern, and you need different measures to try and address that, including through customs, border force, but also, as we've heard announced today, giving trading standards additional support and powers to make sure that they're getting on top of that trade.
Because what the news was today is that, in fact, those free samples, there's this loophole that children basically can be given free samples because they're not selling them to people that are underage. So they're trying to close that loophole. Do you think that will really help?
I think that's a pretty minor measure, but just to explain it, the reason why the free sample kind of exemption is there is because in the early days of vapes, again, we were trying to get smokers to use them. So the idea of a smoker wandering into a vape shop and being able to try, great. But unfortunately, the chickens have come home to roost. So that's a minor measure. I think more support for trading standards. So in terms of where young people buy a vape, the most common venue is a corner shop, a newsagent. So we need to take some action on that.
You have said, though, that you don't think they should be banned. And I know you have laid out that we don't know the full extent of how harmful they are. But you have outlined quite a few. Why is that not the way to go? Because, do young kids ever need to pick up a vape?
Well, let's think about the market. So there's a category of products, disposable vapes. I won't name the brand names. Everybody sees them thrown in the street now. That's what young people are using. 68% of young people are using a disposable and that's this year, compared to 7% in 2021. So the market has been fundamentally transformed by this category. I think we need to increase the price of that category quite significantly. Price is a major deterrent to young people. You can buy one of these for $1.99. I think there's something fundamentally wrong with that. The broader category of vaping products, the tanks, the things that smokers use to try and quit, I don't think that we should ban those because I've been doing the trials and I know they work for smokers. So it is about trying to be nimble and strike a balance. Let's not have prohibition because that has other consequences, but let's get the regulatory framework stronger and more nuanced than it currently is.
Professor Bald there, and she spoke about the trading standards. Well, Kate Pike is the lead officer for vaping at the professional organisation, the Chartered Trading Standards Institute. She spoke to the Today programme and welcomed the government's plan, but said changes to the colourful packaging should also be considered.
How can we make these products less attractive to children? And there's a call for evidence open at the moment, and we're hoping that many people will be submitting ideas to that call for evidence to enable products to become less attractive to children. For example, we need to be looking at the packaging. We need to be looking at the positioning of these products in store. We need to be looking at the promotion, particularly on social media, and how to ensure that children aren't attracted to these products just to give it a go, which is the main concern at the moment.
Which we were hearing particularly with girls, right, from Professor Bald. Well, the numbers of young teenagers who smoke tobacco cigarettes instead, it's hit a record low. Fewer than 12% of secondary school students have ever smoked a cigarette in 2021. But in place, the number of young teenagers vaping is at a record high. I want to bring in two people who know a lot about vaping among teens. One is Leanne Maguire, the mother of a teenage daughter who was addicted to vaping when she was 15. Good morning, Leanne.
Morning.
And we also have Rob Pavey, who is the head teacher at Cheney School, a secondary school in Oxford. Welcome, Rob.
Good morning.
I'm just seeing already 84844 people getting in touch on vaping, and I'll get into some of the comments in just a moment. But Leanne, I want to start with you. Tell us what happened to your daughter. I said she was addicted to vaping at 15.
Yeah, well, that was her words to me. So that was last year. She turned 16 in January, and as part of my voluntary role, I sit on a citywide committee in Glasgow, and this is something that we've spoken about for a couple of years now about vaping. So I was quite surprised when my daughter, well, first of all, I caught her out. It was clearly being hidden. Thankfully, I was in a fortunate position that I know what these what the disposable vapes look like. I knew what to look out for, etc. And I suspected, and I found out. And
can I stop you for 1 second and forgive me for jumping in? What do they look like for those parents that don't know?
Yeah, so that's a good point. They look like highlighters, really. I mean, if you saw them sitting on your child's desk at home, you probably wouldn't blink an eyelid. You would come in and walk past and just think it's a highlighter. A lot of these small disposable ones are so easy to conceal. And actually, I mean, when I eventually did search my daughter's room after finding this out and having a chat with her, and she said she was addicted, I found over 15 like hidden within her room because they are so small they can be easily concealed. So yeah, I was quite taken aback when we found out that she was vaping. And this is where our group has tried to campaign for more education for young people and parents, because the two things that my daughter said to me was, one, there's no nicotine in them. That was the very first thing, which I nearly fell off my chair when she said that. And then two, she turned around and says to me that she was addicted to them. It's the habit of lifting them up, sucking on them. She felt that they eased her signs of anxiety. So straight away, that was really concerning to me.
And what about that point that Professor Bald brought up, that girls are more likely to experiment? What do you think about that?
I mean, I think certainly the reports that I've heard, again, this is not from my daughter, but through my group, the reports I've heard is that some young girls are using them as an appetite suppressant. Some of them are using the colours to match their outfits. So I suppose I can see why that would maybe be more attractive to young girls, where they maybe match them at nail polish and outfits, and it's like a bit of a trend. But certainly I don't think we need to lean back and think this is more of an issue with young girls. I think it's an issue with young teens and young children. I mean, in Glasgow, we're hearing reports as young as primary 5, so that's around 10 years old. Vaping. So I think it goes straight back to that marketing point that Linda brought up, and I know that a lot of the vape companies hate it when we bring it back to that point, but the fact is, what grown man or adult is sucking on a blueberry, raspberry, ripple vape that's bright pink? Very few, I'm sure.
I'll go 84844 if you are that person, get in touch. But you know, you bring up so much that I want to ask you. How did your daughter obviously admitted to it, said she was addicted, and how did she stop then? Is it any different to stopping smoking, do you think, which many of us will have had experience personally or off a loved one doing it?
It's very difficult. So, I mean, at the moment I'm saying that she has stopped, but I say that with quite trepidation because at the moment she's on study leave. So she's not at school. She's out doing her volunteering. So she's not around that peer group that are entirely doing it. We had periods from last October until now where she would stop. And then the minute she was kind of back into her peer group, she would start again. Now, we did, on a regular visit to the GP about something else, I did ask my GP, what do we do in this situation? If she's saying she's addicted to it, how do I get her off it? What's the alternative, etc.? And the GP turned around and said, there is no alternative, because vapes are seen as an alternative to tobacco smoking. There's no alternative to vape smoking. So I think, again, that's the challenge that you're up against as a parent, is that how do you get your child out of this vicious circle where they're okay when they're at home, they can maybe step away from it, they can listen to you, they understand, don't go near it. But then the minute they're back in that peer group and everybody around about them is doing it, a 15-year-old is not going to have the self-control that some adults have. And that's the challenge as a parent that you're up against. It's almost like fighting a losing battle.
I want to turn to you, Rob. We've heard Leanne and her daughter's story. How much of a problem do you think it is?
Well, it's certainly a problem. The The difficulty is, of course, it's much less visible, or you can't smell it as much. Rather more to the point, with cigarettes, you can detect it either as a parent or as a teacher, because you can smell it on clothes, you can smell it in buildings. But vapes, there's a certain kind of fruity aroma, but is that just the air freshener or is that a vape? It's much harder to detect. And like Leanne said, they're very, very small and they do look like highlighters.
I was just looking up actually before I came to speak to you, can you detect electronic cigarettes or vapes? And there are some systems, right, that hotels can have that will detect it, that's different from a smoke alarm. Do you have them in schools?
So we don't. I've heard of some schools that have installed them, and we're considering trialling a couple in a couple of locations. I don't know, to be honest, how well they work, because after all, it's water vapor, and I don't quite know how sensitive they need to be or how effective they are. But we're considering trialling one in the sixth form toilets. It has to be said.
Oh, it's always the sixth form toilets, isn't it? Time immemorial, where everything goes down. But when it comes to the issues, I think that Leanne was outlining for her daughter, is it something that kids have come to their teachers about, worried about addiction to vaping or worried about using them?
No, not much, not yet. We've had a sort of a halcyon few years where the cigarette smoking has dropped off a cliff. There's almost none of it that comes to light in school, and now vape smoking is picking up. I don't think there's yet the concern that there probably should be, either with parents or with teenagers, about the possible harms it's doing. So we're not seeing yet many people coming forward. We do find them, either that drop out of people's bags or when we have cause to check someone's bag, we do find them and we do take, appropriate action at that point, including informing parents. But
do you get detention or anything? Is there...
Well, I mean, the first thing is telling mum and dad that's the main thing, and we have a very effective thing of an hour's worth of public health information with Mrs. Conway. That's extremely effective at deterring almost everything, plus detentions as necessary. And if someone is trying to sell them, which we have found someone recently doing that, then we have suspended a couple of people for that. That is. So
sorry to interrupt you. I'm just seeing so many comments coming in. Let's go through some of them together. I'm a secondary school teacher and worried about the widespread use of vapes by teens. This is a question. Are parents regularly searching bags so schools don't have to? The sweet flavours dupe parents into thinking their kids have a new body spray. It's naive or neglectful, of parents not to investigate. Leanne, of course, talked about going through the bags, and you talked, Rob, only going through them if it's necessary, really looking for something else, I think I detected.
Yeah, absolutely. We wouldn't want to be in a position where we're doing regular routine searches. That's very heavy-handed. We're not a police state, we're a school. But I think this conversation is very important, because it is when parents and schools are saying the same thing, and when there's sensible, appropriate action, as your first speaker said, from trading standards and so on, then we can get on top of this. I mean, this is... teenagers don't have a great track record for listening to what their teachers say on things like this. But when parents and schools and official action on things like the marketing, and like Leanne says, strawberry, blueberry, bubblegum nonsense, is that really aimed at adults? Then it can be reduced.
There's another comment coming in relation to that, Rob and Leanne. Just ban the disposable ones and only make the other type available by prescription. The disposable ones are so obviously designed to attract kids, bright colours like pens, sweet flavours. It's blatant profiteering. Grown-ups, government, just admit it and act now, not in a few months or next year. Get real. Another one, also angry, do officials really think that vapes are a device to stop smoking? It's a new product entirely. If it's a medical product, it should be sold to chemists. So kind of comes to the prescription angle again. Any research into how many users vape who have never smoked? I know my first guest has been looking at that, and there are high numbers. It has ended up being a product used by people that it wasn't intentionally. Well, that some say it wasn't intentionally designed for. I need to couch my words there. But that does bring up, of course, the government actions today, talking about closing that loophole. Would you like to see it go further, Leanne?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in Scotland we now have, I think we're sitting at 22 councils have called on Scottish Government for a ban on disposable e-cigarettes. Because what we need to, we're kind of, I know the main point of conversation just now is youth vaping, but the disposables have a really detrimental impact on our environment. There are pets choking on them out at parks. There are young toddlers that we're getting reports of at our group picking them up in parks and sucking on them. So there's a number of risks involved in particularly disposable vapes, and yes, I would like to see it go further.
Here's another one, and you alluded to this as well, Leanne. This is from Kate. She says, as a mother of a 14-year-old boy who claimed to be addicted to vaping, it's important to recognise that another reason young people may continue to use vapes after the first experimental experience is that they believe it can alleviate anxiety. The motivations then shift from the initial wanting to be cool or enjoy the flavour and colourful packaging. My son has now quit after a period of gradually reducing usage over a number of months. It's an interesting one. You mentioned it already, Leanne. Let me go back to you, Rob. I mean, what about anxiety in teenagers and vaping? Is that something that teachers are talking about?
I can see how that works. I can see that there's a lot of sense in that. Yes, I'm not sure it's come up as a prime motivator, but I can definitely see how some teens, particularly with exams coming up and so on and so forth, and various other social anxieties and social media and so on that we're all familiar with, I can see how that would fit. It's not surfaced as the main reason yet. I do think, like Leanne said, the peer pressure thing and the attractive packaging and so on and so forth is much more of a factor at the minute.
Really interesting that they continue to come in. One more from Michelle. It seems to be like the same problem we had previously with so-called Alco Pops. Lots of sugary sweet concoctions designed to appeal to youngsters. I can't recall they were banned, but they seem to disappear after a while. Yeah, it might be worth following up on that. Rob and Leanne, thank you both so much for speaking to us this morning about vaping, as indeed the government intends to close that loophole that was giving out free vapes to children.